Hamilton is joining us in Orlando again, and Bruce Mateen's father is also speaking out. What is he telling the public again?
Oh, he was very quick to respond, and he said he will never forgive his son, and he's embracing the families of those who lost their lives and those who were shot and who are still being treated in Orlando Regional Medical Center, which is in the shadow of downtown Orlando, just behind me right here. Sadiq Martin said had he known that his son was capable of something like this, he himself would have called police.
This is the worst thing can happen for a father to see his son act like this. I'm not aware of at all. I wish he was alive. I could ask him the same question that you have. And I cannot tell you why he did do such act. This is against the principle of me and the whole family.
It's okay.
It wasn't ideal.
Sadiq Martin, that's Omar's father. He says the family is devastated, and it's very telling when a father says that they can't forgive their son. Now, let me take you back to the timeline that Sunday morning when things happened in Pulse nightclub. The gunshots rang out about 2 o'clock in the morning. At 2:02, there was a Facebook post that basically said from the Pulse nightclub owners, if you're in the club, run for your lives right now. Police got to the scene fairly quickly. They negotiated for about 3 hours' time. And during the time that he was in the club, Omar Martin called 911 on 3 separate occasions. So he made 3 phone calls. And during the course of those conversations, this is interesting here because he referenced the Tsarnaev brothers, the Boston bombers. He talked about affiliating himself with ISIS, but he also said he sympathized with Hezbollah. What's interesting about that is that Hezbollah and ISIS don't see eye to eye. They're in direct conflict with each other. So that has raised questions as to whether or not Omar Martin was actually radicalized. The FBI director, James Comey, specifically addressed those 3 911 calls.
He made 911 calls from the club during the attack at about 2:30 in the morning, Sunday morning. And there were 3 different calls. He called and he hung up. He called again and spoke briefly with the dispatcher, and then he hung up. And then the dispatcher called him back again, and they spoke briefly. So there were 3 total calls.
FBI Director James Comey. Our team coverage continues now here on The Morning Show. Channel 4's Heather Lee is covering the story from the Orlando Regional Medical Center, where, by the way, in just a little bit later this morning, I think it's about 10:30, we're going to hear from some of the doctors and patients who are still inside the hospital. But we start with Channel 4's Ashley Mitchum. Ashley, last night, the community staged a vigil. The turnout was intense. People were emotional. There was sadness, but there was also love.
I've never seen a vigil so huge before in our area here in Florida. I mean, if you saw the aerial pictures, people were packed together. This whole green area in front of the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center was slammed full of people. You can see that there's been some memorials set up here. They're really all spread out throughout the green, several different places like this where people have left notes, people have left candles, flowers, flags, you name it. Even some of them are personalized. You can tell it's people that left them because they knew the victims. And this memorial is for the 49 people who lost their lives last night. City leaders said that this was the largest vigil they've ever seen. A lot of emotions were here, raw and real, but everybody was peaceful and compassionate toward each other. The city really came together as one to try to cope with the deadliest shooting rampage that we've seen in American history. So this pain that people are feeling, it doesn't discriminate against, race, religion, or sexuality. Everyone is feeling hurt. It's just a devastating blow here to the city, which is, known to be the happiest place on earth. And again, we've seen a few people just coming here through the area throughout the morning. Of course, it's a work day, so less people, probably more will come later on their lunch breaks and at the end of the work day. But early this morning when we arrived, before people came to work, they were here. So still an active memorial here, Bruce, and just a lot of people who are upset still.
Ashley, thank you very much. Can you imagine what it was like inside the Orlando Regional Medical Center when the medical teams were deployed to take care of the massive amounts of casualties who were brought into the hospital? While the scene outside was chaotic, the scene inside the hospital was very orchestrated, and the doctors, the nurses, the medical techs, the people in the surgical theater were very organized and ready to handle this situation because they are Central Florida's only level 1 trauma center. Channel 4's Heather Lee is following that part of the story. And Heather, a little later this morning, we expect to hear from some of the doctors who were there and perhaps even some of the patients.
Yeah, around 10:30 a.m. is when we're supposed to hear from about 8 of those doctors. And we are hoping that we're going to be able to talk with some of the patients that have been in here to kind of talk about the ordeal that they have been through, what it was like when they first got into this hospital, and what the last 48 hours has been like for them. But I will say that this hospital really has been off limits for media, and that's because it is just very busy inside. They don't want anyone in there that doesn't belong in there, that doesn't need to be in there because of how hectic it is. And it was extremely hectic as well on Sunday morning. As you can imagine, they were told at first about 20 people had been wounded, but that number quickly began to grow. They had a total of 44 gunshot wounds, the doctor says. As the patients were being rushed in, many of them were desperately trying to communicate until the very end. Yesterday, they told us at least 9 people that were brought to this hospital died. The doctor saying they did everything they could to make those people comfortable. All the while, they were also having to deal with the logistics of the hospital and make room for everyone coming in.
We normally have the capacity to have 3 operating rooms running by virtue of being the only level 1 trauma center in Central Florida. We talked with the OR staff, our anesthesiologists. They immediately started calling in extra teams. So we were up to 6 rooms within about 90 minutes. We brought in our OR staff from the adjacent pediatric trauma center and from the adjacent women's hospital. So we were able to quickly get 6 operating rooms up and running to be able to take care of the victims.
Now, something we also heard, the hospital went into a temporary lockdown because they thought a shooter was inside the hospital. This happened Sunday. Basically, they put the hospital into lockdown, and at that point, they started not accepting patients anymore. And because of that, they actually barricaded the doors to the ER room because they were still operating. And this was a very crucial moment for the patients in the hospital and the doctors in the hospital. And again, I want to remind everyone that that briefing with the news or with the media is going to happen at 10:30. And again, we're hoping to hear from at least 8 doctors and possibly even some patients. Bruce.
Thank you, Heather. You know, I know from my years of experience in being in this business that trauma centers, they're basically staffed to handle, you know, anything that happens, anything that comes in. They're not ready to handle a mass casualty event. And I know that at UF Health, they do have a disaster plan, as they do here at the Orlando Regional Medical Center. And I want you to know that Jacksonville was ready to step in and help should their help be needed. The doctors and the powers that be at UF Health basically talked to the people at Orlando Regional Medical Center and say, hey, if your staff is overwhelmed, if you need us to be there, if we can help save lives, we're at the ready. Thankfully, the crew here had enough staffing and was equipped to do what they needed to do. They thanked Jacksonville for their help, but none of the doctors had to travel down here to Orlando. Mel, Nikki?
All right, Bruce, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. And